proving that his methods work in real life. He's been part of 8 national championship games and worked with top performers across virtually every major sport there is. He's helped train tennis players, golfers, Major League Baseball players, NBA players, UFC fighters, U.S. Special Forces personnel, and even some of the highest achieving CEOs in business today. Sports Illustrated named him the sports world's best brain trainer, so please help me in welcoming the man the highest performing people and organizations around the globe bring in when they need that winning edge. The CEO of Limitless Minds,
Trevor Moawad, renowned mental conditioning expert, and has a book out that it's called It Takes What It Takes.
Just confidence-wise in my throws and watching the highlight film and working with Trevor.
Oh, Trevor's it's in his blood. That's why he's such a good mental conditioning coach. The guy knows everything about personality and knows about attitude, and he's so dedicated. I think that's the biggest thing. You can tell he loves what he does, which makes him so good at it.
We spend so much money in our support systems to develop and get these guys how to think, how to play with Trevor and all of our guys in the offseason with sports psychology and the player development.
I mean, Trevor Moawad has been mentioned as a representative that works with our players as well.
There's a middle ground, we believe, and that middle ground is neutral thinking. Neutral thinking fundamentally is truth and behavior-based thinking, which means it's going to focus on the next series of steps that you can do to start to move you forward.
When you hear Wilson speak, you tend to think that he's being positive, but really the idea, one of the things that they work on is being less negative, and actually something that they talk a lot about is being neutral.
When you start the game, though, with a pick six, how do you mentally get back in gear, put that behind you to the point where you can also encourage the rest of your receivers?
Angie, I think it's a great question. I think, obviously that one play wasn't what we wanted, but there's a lot of game left. And I go straight to neutral. I've always talked about it, but, being neutral, not being too high, not being too low, understanding that neutrality is going to allow me to be successful, more times than not. I'm such a big believer in it. I think it's helped my career, my life, everything else, from the greatest moments to the toughest moments, and just being to remain neutral allows me to just focus on the next play, the next moment, and just being in it, and I think that's been a key component of it, and it's why I started a business and everything else around it. I really believe in it, and Trevor Moawad and I have spent so much time around this concept, that thought process for the past 10, 11 years.
We really build this program on being neutral and understanding that every game is just as important as the other.
As a pitcher, you try not, it's kind of out of your control to a certain extent, so you need to be able to stay kind of neutral there if you're not getting runs or if you are getting runs.
Did a great job today, just staying neutral, just having fun out there.
Honestly, we don't get overly hyped or overly down for any opponent. We try and do our best to really stay neutral through these things and try and put our best foot forward.
When shit happens to you and you're like, oh, let's be positive. Like, it's sometimes impossible to be positive. So being neutral, just not going into negativity, is very useful. It's very simple. It's very hard to do because it's a constant work, but it's very, very, very useful. So I feel like I've started there, and then I start to shift into a better energy.
What a leadership forum. It's as you kind of saw in that intro video, I come from a very unique world, having an opportunity to work with many of the best athletes, coaches, military operations, special operators, as well as businesses throughout the country. So a huge honor to be with this group as you really focus in an area in and around finance and life insurance that's mission critical, obviously tough to do, the best of the best last. So getting an opportunity to fit in and speak in this particular area relative to resiliency, I think is incredible, because what you've done has been very resilient to get here, and how you're adapting relative to technology and And ultimately, the task I think we're all facing in March of 2021 is how do we make sure we're prepared for the world we live in now? It doesn't help us much to be prepared for a world that no longer exists. But how do we adapt, adjust, and be prepared for what we're doing now? So thank you again for the opportunity. My goal really within this 30-minute keynote window is to give you a couple basic things that are going to take you from great to great, good to better, or whatever you're facing. If it's not optimal right now, help you take that next step. In the sports world, we look at our psychological architecture as part of the marginal gains that we need to grow each year to get better. We really focus on what we call down at Fort Bragg, the aggregate of marginal gains. And what does it mean to aggregate marginal gains? It basically means how can I make micro improvements across a wide variety of areas? And in many cases, it's human performance. So how can I sleep a little better? How can I eat a little better? How can I manage the timing of when I eat? How can I learn a little bit more about my specific craft, my customers, the people around me? How can I physically get a little bit stronger? And then also, how can I psychologically grow? And our premise has always been, you don't need to be sick to get better. And I want to say that again, we don't need to be sick to get better. I remember the early origins of the University of Alabama football program, and whether you follow sports or not, as I'm sure you all understand, it's an EBITDA-driven business, and it very much is a business where the teammates, the athletes are your employees, and your coaches and administrators are your leadership. And a college football team is essentially 120 employees, in which you lose 35% of those employees every year. And so you have to build out a program, which essentially means when you lose people, the other people that shift into those spots understand those behaviors, and great salespeople, great performers, great first-round draft picks don't take all their skill and qualities with them, but the people that step into those roles learn how to do that. And when we would get to the University of Alabama, we had 40 coaches led by Nick Saban. Nick Saban was voted a few years ago the 11th best leader in the world, according to Forbes. I'm originally from Seattle, Washington, lived half my life in the South, Georgia and Florida. But, I'd never really understood the passion around sports. But what I do know is our success at the University of Alabama that would transpire after our first few years took us from about a $4 million EBITDA to a $140 million EBITDA program. And winning, again, is a huge deal. How you do it, that you can sustain it, and more importantly, that you have a formula and a recipe that can be repeated year after year after year. And that's really what we're all looking for. When we draft players in the National Football League, I spent 9 years, we break people into 4 categories. Unconsciously incompetent. That's somebody that doesn't know that they don't know. What does it mean ultimately? Well, it means if they're having success or failures, they have no idea why anything is happening one way or the other. They're just sort of free-flowing. The second phase is consciously incompetent. Somebody who recognizes, you know what, I got to get better at technology. I got to get better at my relationships. I got to get better at my Zoom meetings. I got to get better at public speaking. They recognize that they're facing a challenge. That doesn't mean they're necessarily going to do anything about it. But essentially, if you think of it in medical terms, it's like receiving a diagnosis, but you haven't decided to embrace the treatment. The third phase is what we call consciously incompetent, which means you can have incredible quarters, great performances, but when asked how that success came to pass, you really don't understand. It could be lunar alignment, it could be specific customers or clients. You don't really understand specifically what's driving that success. And I think the last part, which we're really striving for, is conscious competence. You know, and you know that you know. you have success and you can sustain it. You might make a mistake. You understand the mistake. You know how to make the adjustment. You understand where you're going and the formula, the recipe, no different than a chocolate chip cookie has 16 ingredients and they have to be put in a specific order. You understand that relative to you, and you know sort of how to get where you want to go. And I want to give you a couple things I think that may support you on your journey too, that as it relates to that professional and personal resiliency. And all really resiliency means, big term used in the military, is just that you can weather the storm, that you can handle the challenges that life throws at you, good or bad. Many times in the sports world, success is people's adversity, just as much as failure might be, or short-term failure or long-term success. So a couple things I really remember though from 2007. We were coming to the University of Alabama from the Miami Dolphins, and that first team meeting was going to be a big one. So it's our head coach, about 5'8", very quiet, very introverted, but very well prepared before any meeting. And he would be addressing 120 athletes for the first time, and then 40 coaches, which obviously he'd been working with, and his sort of team and his sort of staff, his sort of financial advisor support. And as he walked down to do that meeting, I'll never forget, he kind of hit on two key stories that I think really resonate universally across anything. Number one, he held up an apple in his left hand and then a bag of Doritos in his right hand. And he looked at the audience in front of him and said, "Do you really need a world-class nutritionist?" And he pointed to the one he just hired. Said, "Do you really need a world-class nutritionist to tell you which one of these things is better for you? The question is, why should you choose the apple?" And it was an important point because he was saying, we're going to have all these people around you, but common sense is common sense. You're going to be a great football player. Your body is your moneymaker, and you can't spend a lot of time on bags of Doritos. You need to choose the apple, and I can't make it better for you, but you got to be able to make choices that simple. Secondly, he would tell a story he'd heard about a very successful magazine entrepreneur. Now, he'd heard this at a Toastmasters event, and anybody who knows Toastmasters, it's a local, regional, sort of national speakers bureau that teaches you how to speak. And this particular time, there was a very successful, presently successful magazine entrepreneur who'd had a lot of struggles as a high school student. In fact, he had substance abuse issues in the Midwest and all sorts of challenges, and was failing out of high school. But he promised his mother as a junior, who was raised by a single mom, that he would take a test in the 1980s known as the SAT. Now, the SAT, the dreaded three-letter word, had two parts, a math part and a verbal part, both scored out of 800 points. Now, this young man didn't expect to do well. His mother didn't expect him to do well, but he did agree to take the test, knowing that if somehow he could score well, it could maybe balance his poor academic average. Well, he takes it in May, gets a score back in June, and surprising to everybody, gets a 1480 out of 1600. Well, his mother, and for any moms on the call, you understand, she confronted him. She said, "Did you cheat?" And she knows her son, right? And he said, "I tried to cheat, but the way that the actual Scantron tests were, the number 2 pencil, the bubble, I couldn't cheat." She said, "You mean to tell me you're really this smart?" He said, "All I can tell you is I didn't cheat." So he had a little bit of cognitive dissonance. You see an outcome that really doesn't resonate with how you feel about yourself. So he's stunned. Now at that point, he's getting ready to go back to school in the fall because he's still enrolled. And he says, "Well, I guess because I'm smart, I might as well go to class." And so he starts going to class. And now that he goes to class, he's not hanging out with the group he used to when he didn't go to class. And the professors, the teachers see him in class. They start to treat him differently. Look at that score. Maybe we've missed the boat on this young man. And graduates, goes to a community college in Kansas, goes to a 4-year school in Kansas, as coach would say to the group in the room, and went on to the Ivy Leagues and many years later became this successful magazine entrepreneur. So you're in the room. It's not a football story. You hear it. You're like, okay, well, this guy obviously had talent, had ability, just never knew how to unleash it. But Coach said that's not where the story starts. In fact, the story doesn't start until 12 years after he had all his success after graduate school. And so I remember just sitting in there kind of shaking my head like, oh, this is interesting. And it turns out that the SAT board yearly will evaluate their test-taking procedures and policies. Now, the year he took the test, he was one of 13 people accidentally sent the wrong SAT score. And in fact, his actual SAT score was a 740 out of 1,600. Now, you could have heard a pin drop in that room. And Coach's point is he looked at all of the employees, all of the athletes, all of the coaches was people think, according to him, that the 1480 is what changed his life. But in reality, what actually changed his life was when he began to act like a 1480. And what does a 1480 do? He or she routinely goes to class. So the key point that he wanted to reinforce before we ever stepped on a football field was that your behavior precedes your success. Let me say that again. Your behavior precedes your success. That before you become a championship team, before you become an elite financial advisor, before you become a successful seller of life insurance, before you become a great parent, before you become really healthy, you have to understand the characteristics and behaviors that allow you to do that. I think that that's really important. So one of the things you want to think about right now as it relates to your own professional development in the Fonseca Leadership Forum is, am I doing the things in March of 2021 that allow me to succeed in my present industry, in my present region, with the specific customers I have? Am I doing those things? And even more importantly, do I know what those things are? And that's when teammates, people we work with, or books, or reading, or the people that are our leadership or that we work for, working with them to understand what does good look like, what does conscious competence look like, and if I'm not doing those things, truthfully, it's as simple as getting behind those things. Because when we form a habit, that habit forms us, good or bad. A good friend of mine was the COO of NASCAR and did the big Nextel deal that was a really $900 million sponsorship deal with NASCAR that put him on the map. And he said one of the things that he's always done since graduating from college is make 10 outgoing new calls a week. So in addition to whatever his customer base is, he's going to make 10 new outgoing calls a week and 30 to 40 a month. And just that doing it always takes him different directions. It allows him to meet new people. It forces him and his assistants to find different people that he could call and talk business with. So again, I just think back to the little things. How does our behavior precede our success? Now, the second thing that we really wanted to understand, and kind of a critical point, I think as it relates here, is how important is positive thinking, which is always talked about, to the success of a team, to the success of an individual. Because it's a tough sell with our employees, with our athletes. And as we started to research it, which was my job, we started to see that while it was helpful, a lot of the data around it was anecdotal, that we couldn't prove that being more positive allowed you to be more successful. And in fact, in many cases, it created anxiety and made people feel like they were being forced to be positive when it didn't really line up with the reality that they were dealing with at present. So we started to study the other reality. Well, if positive thinking we're not sure about, where are we with negative thinking? Well, all the data around being negative was clear. And it was anywhere between 85 to 100% with the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, Harvard, Georgetown, the University of Pennsylvania, and their resilience studies, that negative thinking worked negatively all the time. And so as we started to understand that and look at that, then organizationally we said, all right, well, let's not worry about trying to get people to be more positive. Let's just focus on helping people learn how to be less negative. Now that sounds bizarre. That sounds unique. But I think when you think about it, you think that less negative and more positive are synonyms. They're not even close to synonyms. And in fact, being less negative is much easier to do, but almost 70 times more impactful on our lives. Negativity, since 10,000 years ago, we've been wired to receive much more easily than positive thinking. That's why our news is that way. That's why so many things are customized that way for us. But 10,000 years ago, if you didn't assume the worst, you could be eaten by a dinosaur. And our minds, as crazy as it sounds, haven't evolved from them. But negativity weaponizes us against us, and it's not a good place to be. It facilitates or exacerbates illnesses by over 80%. It takes away our ability to make decisions by 50%. It reduces our creativity from 18 to 30%. It's a difficult place to be. So as we started to understand that, we said, well, how do people transmit negativity most effectively to hurt themselves or the people around them? What we learned, it's not the inside thoughts. Meditation really attacks that, changing the inside thoughts. They have power, but everybody is a little bit highly negative in their inside brain. But it's the outside words that carry the real power. When I say something out loud, it's 10 times more powerful than when I think it. And if it's negative, it's a multiple of 4 to 7 times more powerful on top of that, according to Georgetown. So when I verbalize negativity, I don't want to be here. Why are we doing this? Why am I in this meeting? It's 110 degrees. I hate playing on the road. I can't stand, this particular school. Why are we in this pandemic? When we start to verbalize those things, they increase the probability by 40 to 70 times, according to the data, that what we don't want to have happen, what we just verbalized, will happen. Great example of this, 1986 World Series, Boston Red Sox. Bill Buckner, a famous player, whether you follow sports or not. Bill Buckner is infamous for letting the game-winning run versus the New York Mets score on a ground ball through his legs. Interviewed 12 days before that, resurfaced many years ago, he did an interview and said, obviously my dream would be, to win a World Series, but my real nightmare would be to let the game-winning run score on a ground ball through my legs to cost us the World Series. The power of our own external words is incredible. And when we understand, and not by saying positive things, but by stopping to verbalize negative, it's a game changer. And so understanding that going into our second season at Alabama, we said, how do we help our athletes not say stupid things out loud? Now that sounds crazy, but if we could just help them not say or articulate the wrong negative things out loud, then that would allow their mind to be more free from that clutter and give them a better chance to focus and play better. That wouldn't necessarily make them more positive, but it would make them less negative, which would be a game changer. And for some who can get that mind to positive, the lack of negativity only frees that up more. The second way negativity is transmitted is consumption. What do I mean by consumption? Well, consumption is the television we watch, the radio we listen to, the people we talk to by choice, the social media we follow. They said people who've deactivated Facebook recently have had a 25 to 40% benefit in hope. It doesn't make Facebook right or wrong. That doesn't make TV right or wrong. The recent data out of the University of Pennsylvania says 3 minutes of cable news before 9 a.m. increases your probability by 27%, that after 9 p.m. you'll say you had a terrible day. This is just the data. And we've never been surrounded by more negativity in our news and our radio and our social media than we have the last 12 months. So learning how to minimize that negativity relative to consumption. I'm not talking about your work environment. A lot of times we work with people that we can't control or we can't change. I'm talking about in your own environment, when you get home and you turn that remote on, when you turn your radio on if you're driving, when you do what they call doom scrolling, and you're scrolling up on your social media and your notifications, which have become, even more intense and scary with all the unique things happening in our world today. So what I want you to think about is, where can I be less negative relative to what I say out loud and what I choose to consume? Recognizing that getting to positive, which implies that, hey, you had a tough quarter, but I know the next quarter is going to be better. Well, how do you know? I don't know. How do you know? And I'm really bummed about this. So we actually focus in this middle ground that relates to helping with resiliency. We call neutral thinking. And what neutral thinking does is it looks at the past, and where positive says just forget about it and move on, it says I'm not going to forget about it. It's real and it's true, but it's not predictive because the future hasn't happened. So the only way the past connects to the future is if I behave like I did in the past. If I change my behavior, then my future's altered. Whether good or bad, from Tiger Woods and I did everything right in 2005, and in 2010 I don't do those same things, then I'm not going to be the same golfer. And the common denominator of success, Albert Ian Gray, one of the great insurance writings, I think of the 1940s, really talks about successful people do what unsuccessful people do not like to do. So I think, again, this idea of being neutral is, yes, that's real, but what happens next is determined by what I do, not what I feel, and not what's happened. And it goes to the truth. So the truth might be, hey, we've been in a really difficult situation. We still are at present, but the future could be a lot different based upon how I manage through today. So that's what we call, as an introduction to you, sort of downshifting to neutral, and being able to get my mind to accepting a difficult challenge or accepting something that was really good. Hey, I had an incredible quarter. That doesn't mean automatic pilot's going to happen for Q2. It means that if I do the things that allowed me to be successful, then I'm going to be in a really good shape in Q2. Or if I've done a lot of things in Q1, but the numbers just didn't turn over fast enough, rather than panicking, know that, hey, I got to deal with whatever they say about Q1, but I position myself really well for Q2 and Q3 based upon my behavior. So again, kind of going back to the main points as part of the FinSecca Leadership Forum is, what's my behavior and how does it relate to the types of things that you need to do to be successful, not only in this business, but with my health, in my personal relationships, and saving money and helping other people save money, in my personal goals. And a lot of times what we'll do is write down those things. So Russell Wilson, the quarterback for the Seahawks, if you look at his locker, it says 3 things: great balance, great fundamentals, be engaged. And we've identified sort of those 3 neutral behaviors as how he's going to be a Hall of Fame football player. The balance is physical balance as well as personal balance. The fundamentals are the fundamentals of where your arm is, where your leg is, where your body is, where your stretch is, how you hydrate, but also your fundamentals to connecting with people, being a member of a team. And being engaged means you're going to sit in the front row and keep taking notes. A good friend of mine who was a Navy SEAL, a captain of SEAL Team 5, said the Dallas Cowboys came in a number of years ago when Tony Romo was the quarterback, and there were 9 rows in the meeting room when the SEALs were going through a leadership special with them, and Tony Romo sat in the back far right corner in the 9th row. And the first thing they said was, they confronted him and said, look, I don't know what's right or wrong, or if it's your personality, but the captain of our team, the quarterback, can't be sitting in the 9th row. He's got to be sitting in the middle and the front row. And there's just certain behaviors like that if we do them, we'll catch up. So, maybe you write down those top 3 to 5 things that are going to drive your success. You already know what they are, but that you're reminding yourself of them in your version of a locker. And then I think, so that behavior is preceding the success, and I know what those are. I think the second point is, where can I look to minimize the negativity in my life? I'm not talking about all the other people around you. We all deal with de-energizing people, but where can you do that as best you can in your circumstances, and allow yourself to get to neutral, which is just focusing on what I need to do next to be successful, as opposed to I'm going to be the best, I'm going to be successful, which is a little bit harder for us to do, that idea of being positive, but being neutral based on a car. If we're going backwards, we got to get to neutral and stop, and then we got to make our decision what we're going to do if we're going to move forward. So a true opportunity and pleasure to join you today. Excited to join you next in the Q&A.